This is a closer look with the Monitor. I'm Craig Blumenschein from Prairie Public, and in just a moment, we'll visit with North Dakota Monitor reporter Mary Stoyer. The topic: North Dakota voters will decide a constitutional measure in the June 9th primary election that could change how future constitutional amendments are written and presented to voters. But first, the Energy and Environmental Research Center at the University of North Dakota has been one of the state's most important research institutions for decades, helping advance energy technology while supporting hundreds of jobs and attracting millions of dollars in research funding. Last month, uncertainty surrounded federal grants and led them to furlough employees and reduce staff. Now, some of those workers are returning, but questions remain about the center's long-term outlook and what the situation says about the future of research funding here in North Dakota. Joining us is Jeff Beach, Deputy Editor of the North Dakota Monitor and author of the latest reporting on the EERC's workforce changes. Jeff, welcome back to A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
You're welcome, Jeff. Glad that you're with us. For listeners, Jeff, who may not have followed this story from the beginning, what led to the furloughs and staffing reductions in the first place?
Well, the EERC, the Energy and Environmental Research Center in Grand Forks, relies very heavily on federal grants, contracts with entities like the Department of Energy, primarily to do research projects that can take several months of work, sometimes longer. When the Trump administration kind of took over, they did a lot of examining of research contracts at all levels, really, not just from the Department of Energy, but agriculture, health and human services kinds of projects. And they put a pause on funding for a lot of projects while they kind of vetted them and made sure they were in alignment with the Trump administration policies and goals. The stream of money kind of turned into a trickle there for a while and kind of hamstrung the EERC, and eventually decided that they needed to cut some staff and furlough some of their staff also.
So bring us up to date, the latest developments. How many employees were furloughed? How many have returned to work? And what's made that possible?
They have brought back 2 workers from the furloughs. There could be more coming soon. They did cut 27 positions. There are 11 potential people who could come back that are on furlough now. So that's kind of the situation. They are hoping that they can bring people back as they get some new contracts with the Department of Energy finalized. The funding has been secured, but they still need to finalize the contracts, they say, before they can start to maybe bring a few more folks back to the EERC.
Is this an unusual situation for an institution like the EERC that has been really so important to the fabric, I guess, of the University of North Dakota?
Yeah, I think it is a pretty unusual situation, but it's not unique to EERC. I don't think, as far as research goes under the current Trump administration. There have been a lot of research projects where that got defunded. In agriculture, it was especially in the conservation side. Some things got defunded, but like I said, health research, the dollars have kind of slowed down. The new projects that they are looking for partnership with entities like the EERC, those have slowed down somewhat too. So it's it is kind of unique in recent history, but not unique to the EERC.
Do you have a feel, Jeff, for the types of projects and research areas that were most affected by this uncertainty of funding?
So I know one area that got cut was late in the game. EERC still got its funding, but a carbon pipeline research project was cut through the Department of Transportation. So I think carbon storage and carbon capture programs might be in flux. Carbon capture for things like enhanced oil recovery are probably where where you might see where carbon capture might still have a lot of funding, and that's actually one of the key areas that the Department of Energy announced recently that they want EERC to work on what Senator John Hoeven calls "crack the code 2.0," trying to evolve, make some breakthroughs in enhanced oil recovery that could extend the life and make oil wells in western North Dakota more productive.
What are leaders of EERC saying about the center's financial outlook for the rest of the year today?
Well, they're not saying a whole lot. They are still dependent on working with the Trump administration. So I don't blame them for not being overly critical of the situation. The Department of Energy had a representative at the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference last month, and they say that they have kind of vetted the research projects that they inherited from the Biden administration, and that things are back on track, so that at least existing projects, the funding should be back on. I don't know if there'll be the same level of research dollars available from the federal government going forward as there were in the past, however.
Are state lawmakers asking questions about this? Is there a role that the state could play or potentially play in assisting the EERC with its vision and with its goals?
Yes, the EERC also is the state energy research facility designated by North Dakota government, and does get state funding for all kinds of different projects. In the last session, it was authorized to do some nuclear energy research. So the state will always probably providing some level of funding to the ERC, and they also have industry partners. They get money from petroleum companies and from coal companies to work on specific projects, and or on things like carbon capture in the ethanol industry. So they are not solely reliant on the federal government for funding, but it is a big chunk of their budget.
Do we understand the broader economic implications if research funding remains unstable?
Well, I think I don't think the EERC is going to be building back up that staff beyond the furloughed workers anytime soon. I'm sure they'll, Charlie Gurecki, the executive director, I'm sure it was painful for him to have to cut back staff. I'm sure he's going to be budgeting very conservatively. One thing about federal funding that some people don't realize is, when funding is announced for a research project, it's not like the research entity gets the whole chunk of money up front. They usually have to show progress, file reports, quarterly, and then money is released as you go along. So they did land some big federal contracts recently, but it doesn't mean that that money is in the bank for them.
How do you intend to continue to follow this story for us North Dakotans? Jeff?
We'll keep asking regularly where they're at on furloughed people, probably later on at the end of the summer, see how they're doing. We'll be checking in on their Crack the Code 2.0. They do bring in, Senator Hoeven especially is a champion of the EERC and the work that they do for the coal and oil and gas industries. I'm sure he'll continue to work and hopefully bring us in for meetings every once in a while when they talk about some of their GWIZ technology.
Jeff Beach is the deputy editor of the North Dakota Monitor, and you can read his reporting on the EERC and other state policy issues at the North Dakota Monitor, northdakotamonitor.com. It's always free. It's always free from paywalls or subscriptions. Jeff, thanks again for joining us on A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
And we now continue A Closer Look with the Monitor. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Prairie Public. North Dakota voters will decide on a constitutional measure next Tuesday in the June 9th primary election that could change how future constitutional amendments are written and presented to voters. Known as the Single Subject Amendment Measure, The proposal would require constitutional amendments to focus on a single issue rather than combining multiple policy changes into one proposal. Supporters say that would make measures clearer and easier for voters to evaluate. Critics argue that it could create new hurdles for citizen-led initiatives and invite legal challenges. To help us better understand what's at stake, we're joined by North Dakota Monitor reporter Mary Stoyer. Mary, welcome back to A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Hello.
What exactly, Mary, will voters be asked to decide on June 9th?
Well, it's like you said, the proposal is to make all constitutional amendment proposals on the ballot limited to a single subject.
And what problem is the measure intended to address? How did this surface into something that needed to be presented and voted on in this way?
So it was referred to the ballot by lawmakers, and supporters in the legislature basically said the purpose of the resolution is to make constitutional amendments easier to for the public to understand when they're voting on them, and also more straightforward.
Is single subject ambiguous? What does it mean in practical terms?
I think some opponents of the proposal would argue that it could be ambiguous. I think the idea is to make all ballot measures about one thing rather than being about multiple things rolled into one. And legislation passed by lawmakers already has this requirement.
Who brought this forward to become a ballot measure, and what were their arguments that they were making other than, of course, the single question argument? What really were the other concerns?
So the group of lawmakers who sort of championed it say that, this will simplify amendments for voters. And, they said it would prevent scenarios, hopefully, where something only gets passed maybe because it's buried in a long list of other items. I talked to Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, and I kind of asked, was there one specific measure you had seen that had raised concerns to you? And I don't recall him pointing to any one particular thing, but he just kind of said moving forward, he thinks this is a good idea.
It sounds so simple to me. Are there concerns that have been raised by opponents to this question?
Yeah, opponents have said they're worried that this would add another hurdle to especially voter-initiated measures being passed.
And in an indirect way, Mary, is it trying to make that harder for some reason, or is it just not about that?
I guess you could say it's trying to make it harder in that they want to exclude things that are, a bunch of different proposals tacked into one. Like supporters want to exclude what they would deem like hard to understand proposals. But they definitely, they definitely say the purpose is not to make it harder to pass amendments in general. Like they don't advertise it as a way to curtail the voice of citizens. So they say it's not about that, but then opponents are concerned that that'll be the impact. And then they also have said, they're worried about how the definition of single subject could be interpreted. Like they worry that
Who decides that question? Yeah.
So the language of the proposal makes it the Secretary of State, but Secretary Howe, in testimony to the legislature, has said he would rely on the Attorney General's office to help his office make those determinations. So I think supporters of the measure point to that and say, this will be, we'll have officials who know what they're doing interpret this, but then opponents will say, well, they're worried that
they don't like it, they'll find something wrong with it.
Right. Or if anyone is determined to find something wrong with a measure, they could potentially, push to interpret single subject broadly or narrowly.
So this would also apply to constitutional amendments referred by the legislature. It's not just for citizen-led constitutional amendments.
Right. And one question I had, and I don't think I have got it answered at this point, I hope I'm not just forgetting, but I wondered, because laws passed by the legislature already have the single subject requirement, if that already applies to resolutions passed by the legislature that refer something to the ballot. I don't know, but in this case, it'd be anything referred to the ballot would have to pass this test before the Secretary of State's office could certify it to go on the ballot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's my perception, Mary, that this issue really hasn't grabbed the public. There hasn't been much attention paid to this, yet it'll be on the ballot next Tuesday on June 9th when we vote in the primaries. Is that your perception too?
That's certainly my perception as well. Yeah, I haven't heard, I went around asking people about it, but I haven't organically run into conversations of people discussing this.
I've seen no yard signs for or against this proposed constitutional amendment. Mary Steuer covers politics, elections, and public policy for the North Dakota Monitor. You can read her reporting and the reporting of her colleagues at the North Dakota Monitor website, northdakotamonitor.com. Of course, all of what's written for the North Dakota Monitor is free from subscriptions, free from paywalls, and is excellent reporting on state government issues. Mary, thanks for joining us on A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Thank you very much.
And just a quick programming update, A Closer Look with the Monitor will have a brief respite next week, but we'll be back with you on June 18th.